and welcome to yet another very special podcast and conversation here on the Nuremberg Message channel. I'm your host, Shunakshi Chakravarti, and if you've been following us over the last few months, we've done a dozen of such of these interviews where we've discussed all things that have been related to all the industries that matter to the growing economy of India, whether it is the organic world, whether it is the wood world. So many industry leaders have spoken to us over the last few months. And today, I say that this is special because it is not every day that you get to speak to the chief architect, the chief designer of somebody who has won a global competition invited by the Royal Academy in Bhutan to design the Royal Academy in Bhutan in Paro. I'm joined by Mr. Gurpreet Singh, who is the chief architect, the chief boss of the Aakar Designs here in Gurgaon in Delhi NCR. Mr. Gurpreet Singh, thank you very much for taking the time out to do this podcast with us. Your first thoughts?
Thank you so much.
Your first
for
thoughts
this.
on being on this Nuremberg Messe podcast?
Well, it's a great privilege. I take this as an honor to be on this podcast and sharing my ideas and thoughts with your viewers. I think it's always spreading of education and the good word that matters to all of us.
Thank you very much, sir. We will start right in by asking you, what is the story of Aakar Designs? Take us through the journey.
Well, that's a very
A long one.
serious question requiring a lot of merit. But I think the Aakar storyline was such that we formed Aakar in the early 80s, beginning of 80s. Architecture at that point of time was all about modern movement, modern architecture, from the Bauhaus school of thought to the contemporary. Uh, you know, uh, Contemporariness had attained a very brutal thing in America, like say Corbusier in Europe, etc. So at that stage, finding modern contemporary architecture to be very brutal, postmodernism had started to emerge. Say through Michael Graves in the US and then the Pompidou Center in Paris were examples of postmodern architecture. But all along, you knew that postmodernism is not there to stay. It requires something more than that. That's when Aakar came into being. And we thought that we needed architecture which was original, which was an original take on the Indian context. By then, in India, also post independent, Indian architects had taken root, they had discovered their feet in the field. But I think a new turn was needed, which is where Aakar stepped in, and that's where we started our journey.
So, if I may ask, why the name Aakar? What is the meaning?
Well, this is a name that at that point of time I felt one was that it should be an Indian name, and a name that my grandmother could associate with, because she, was time and again when I started my career, I had her blessings with me, so it had to be a name which she could relate to. Hence the word Aakar.
All right, so now we know the origin, the meaning of Aakar and why so, which brings me to my next question, sir, that over the last, so to speak, 10 to 15 years, if you were to compare the Indian architecture space, the Indian design space, what is it that you have seen change over the last decade or so?
See, what has happened is that over the last decade, we have imbibed international architecture in India, but all the same, what we've also gone and done is that we have made it more cost effective, call it because of private players coming in. But somewhere along the line, the software industry has done a good job by creating campuses which are world class. So we need to emulate that example, but all the same, we need to be a lot more sustainable. We need to be a lot more Indian in our approach. We need to develop a language which is more Indian. Say, like, for example, a good example would be Louis Kahn's Ahmedabad Institute, So that's a great example of how Indian architects developing the vocabulary of a brick to the Indian continent. Example, say, like, for example, when we look at Charles Eames, who's done the NID building in Ahmedabad. Now, Charles Eames was a great proponent of Indian design. He's the guy who gave us the virtues of a lota, which has a handle, which is easy to pour and everything. But when you look at the NID campus in Ahmedabad, it does not reflect the Indian ethos that it should have by an architect like Charles Eames.
Okay. So, speaking of which, who are the people that you take inspiration from at Aakar Designs, or someone that inspired you to in your initial years when you started Aakar Design? Some names or some projects that you'd like to talk about?
See, for example, when I look at relevance in the Indian architecture, I think Edward Lutyens was a great guy. The way he put elephants, etc., along, well composed in Rashtrapati Bhavan and our north and south blocks, and the way the whole site was sited, and our, need for deep verandas to protect ourselves from the
Mm,
heat and climate, etc. The climatic response was great. That is
mm.
one. Post that part came somebody like Louis Khan, like I
You
mentioned,
mentioned,
in
yeah,
Ahmedabad.
yeah.
His, I think, vocabulary and the language that he developed, the IIM dormitories, I think, are an excellent example
Mm,
of how the response to Indian climate, to Indian ethos, to Indian building materials is. That's one. Then the third great influence on me personally has been Mr. Doshi's work.
Mr.
You know,
Doshi.
his Sangat, his own office building,
Okay.
to the Gandhi Labor Institute that he
Mm.
did and designed. They were great examples of good architecture.
All right. When you started Aakar Designs, and again over the last few years, over a decade or so, what was something that was missing, and what is the gap that you're bridging? If you can take us through that
See, to
journey.
put it in a very brief manner, what I feel is that what is missing is the lack of local sensitivity
Hmm.
and originality to couple with that local sensitivity.
Hmm.
That's what is lacking. And I think that's a huge gap which a lot of architects can come forward and fill up.
And is that something that you're also filling up, and you're bridging that gap at
We
Aakar
are
Designs?
constantly trying
Okay.
to do
Hmm.
that and constantly doing that. See, India is
Okay.
such a large
Yeah.
geographical
Yeah.
country that we have great examples up in the north to down south and all that. So there's a lot of inspiration we can draw from our historic examples for the way forward.
Okay. Speaking of projects, now let's come to some of the projects at Aakar Designs that you have, you think are some of your outstanding projects. I'm sure all is, but maybe to name a few for our audience, for our listeners, if you can take us through some of your past projects, and we'll then come to your most latest work, which was, like I mentioned in my introduction, is the Royal Academy Bhutan. So maybe some of the projects that you can talk to us about.
See, I would say that at Aakar, we've been very lucky in our journey that we got a big break for these large industrial projects in the then Soviet Union. Now, these
Mm,
projects were so large where you needed a railway line to come and deliver raw products and take out finished products from a project, And those days, everything in the Soviet Union was
mm,
large.
mm.
So we got an opportunity to work on very large scale projects with the best international consultants and top level Indian consultants.
Okay.
So that is what formulated us as a formidable team
Mm,
to be able to work on. Post that, I think it was we are a child of the competition world,
mm.
fair and
Yeah.
free competition that
Yeah.
was there.
Mm,
Like having won the B.R. Ambedkar University
mm,
project was one. Then the GTB Memorial outside Delhi is another example of our work. Then the National War Museum, which was again a global competition, which we won.
mm.
That unfortunately the museum hasn't got built, but then the 71 one War Memorial that is now under construction
Okay.
because India completes
Yeah.
50 years of victory over the 71
Mm,
war. So these are projects that we, apart from the World Environment Schools and the Royal
mm.
Academy Project Bhutan.
Okay. So, which now brings me to my one of my most important questions, and something that I'm also personally interested in learning about from you, sir, is the Royal Academy Bhutan. Like I mentioned, that you were invited by the Royal Academy to be part of this global competition where lots of people participated, top designers, top architects participated in this and were invited. And Mr. Gurpreet Singh and Aakar Designs, they won this, and they took up on this challenge to design and to make the Royal Academy Bhutan. Now, Bhutan, of course, like we know, is one of the happiest countries in the world, and people know it by that. But Bhutan also is in the news and making headlines for all its local treasures and sustainability work that so many locals are doing in that space. Take us through this project, and how was it like to work in Bhutan during this time?
Well, the journey of our project in Bhutan, which is the Royal Academy, started about 10 years back. This was in 2010 almost.
Mm.
So it's been
Over a
almost
decade ago. Yes.
12 years
Yeah.
now. It was a global competition, like you just
Mm.
mentioned. Three international architects, three Indian architects, and three locally Bhutanese architects to give local talent a,
Right.
leg up, who could tie up internationally with anybody.
Right.
So we won that competition. And on winning this competition, we were very clear because the site was a very sensitive site.
Mm.
His Majesty had 600 acres, wherein their wisdom they had allocated us flat land of about 200 acres
Mm.
on one side of the project. But we did not find that site very suitable on account of its not getting the winter sun.
Okay.
So we chose a site which was very challenging to build on and also very sensitive, where the vegetation had to be preserved, some sharp slopes had to be preserved. We couldn't build on that. You had to build sensitively. You had to tread very lightly on the ground. The orientation had to be correct. So, taking on all these challenges, I think I must have visited the site about 6 times
Okay.
prior to the competition.
Okay.
So, hence our deep understanding of the site, its entire site analysis was done, carried out, and hence we, won the
Mm.
competition.
Mm.
And our USP of winning the competition was that we would build it along the Bhutanese traditional way, the way the Bhutanese build,
Mm.
but give it a contemporary look and feel about it.
Right.
Leapfrog Bhutan from its construction where it was into the next generation
Mm-hmm.
by using materials like blue lamb and rammed earth, which is the traditional thing, and stuff like that, and using stone as a veneer, lightweight, because Bhutan is also a seismic area. It's
Yes. Yes.
zone 5 on the seismic scale.
Yes.
So all these factors, which
Very
earlier would be
challenging.
seen as, things that tie us up, came to our advantage, and we could exploit all of them in our.
Which then now brings me to part B of my question, that sustainability, it has become such a buzzword, not just in India but globally. And sustainability has become a buzzword, everywhere, whether at an individual level we are taking to sustainability, goals personally in our personal lives to live more sustainably, or whether it is at an institutional level in schools and colleges that they're talking about sustainability, or whether at businesses. So globally, businesses are taking the sustainability pledge. Now, I want to ask you, for an industry like yours, which is the architecture space, the design space, where you deal with infrastructure and so much construction work that happens that goes into it, how relevant do you think is sustainability in this sector, in this industry, and more specifically at Aakar Designs? What are you doing towards this sustainability?
Answering your question on the onset, I think sustainability is our social and a moral responsibility.
Right.
It is very, very important.
Mhm.
And construction industry, which consumes almost 80% of the sustainability globally, is attained to the construction industry, whether it is steel, manufacturing, etc., and all that. So architects, I think, have a key role to play here when it comes to sustainability. Now, sustainability, unfortunately, is today being seen as a slap on thing.
Yeah.
You use materials that are
Right.
sustainable, you try and tick boxes and all
Mm.
that, whereas that is not the approach to sustainability. Sustainability has to be built into the project from the inception stage.
Mm.
Right from the conceptual stage, you have to
Mm.
start thinking of sustainability.
Mm. Mm.
First of all, how does a site, how can you collect rainwater on a site? For example, here we are
Yeah.
against a World Environment School model.
Okay.
So here this site is divided into three distinct segments. One is the faculty housing,
Mm-hmm.
the other is the academic core, and the fourth is the student housing. Now,
Okay.
as you can see, we are able to, in small portions, collect the water
Mm.
from the sloping hills, which will feed the faculty housing, likewise the academic core, and then third is our student housing.
Mm.
So water is one aspect. Then we also harness wind, as you can see, as windmills at the strategic point, highest point on the site, because we do get wind speeds in excess of 4.5 to 6 kilometers on
Right.
this particular site.
Right.
So understanding the nature of the site and its inherent advantages, which you can turn around for sustainability measures. Now here again, we have built on south facing slopes.
Okay.
So that south-facing slope immediately gives us a wonderful expanse to have solar panels.
Okay. Is
So
this your current project or a
yeah, this is
past
this is a
project? This is a
current
current
project.
project.
Yes,
All right.
current project.
You've spoken
Hence,
about it. Yeah.
solar panels to water collection to all these measures that bring in uh, sustainability has to be thought of from the conceptual stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So clearly, you said that architects do have a key role to play when it comes to the sustainability part of things in businesses, and not just in India, like I said, but globally. Um, do you also, is it a prime focus for you to also take up on projects that have a sustainable angle to it? Like I know you mentioned the Royal Academy is one of those projects, but is that also prime focus when you take up future projects as well?
Actually, today now we have shrunk from a large office to a small
Mm-hmm.
space, primarily because we want to cater to projects about
Hmm.
sustainability because they do require a lot of uh, attention and eye for detail, etc. So hence we are looking forward to only sustainable projects.
All
Like
right.
talking of the Royal Academy,
Mm.
we have harvested timber from the site itself.
All right.
All the
That's
timber that
interesting.
is used in the project is
Mm.
locally harvested from the site. We did that much of clearing where the quantum of timber harvested is equal to the quantum of timber that is used. Now that timber was not only sown, it was kiln dried, it was engineered, treated as a glue lamp member right at site itself.
Okay.
That is one aspect. The
Mm.
other aspect is the stone used in the as veneers for the sloping walls, which otherwise in a zone consumed a lot of stone, is all quarried locally. Third important ingredient of our construction material is the rammed earth that we use
Okay.
for student hostels and faculty residences.
Mm-hmm.
That rammed earth is also locally sourced.
Right.
So with these three prime materials coming locally, you can imagine what is the
Mm. How
how
sustainable
sustainable. Now
it
we are
is,
doing an
absolutely.
embodied energy audit for the project.
Okay.
It will be very interesting, and
Mm.
that audit is actually being done by a third party.
Okay.
So it will be very interesting to see the results of that audit when they are there.
All right.
You know,
So it's actually good to know, sir, and also good for our audience listening and watching this, that you are doing your bit when it comes to being sustainable, not just in your business. Business at the end of the day is money, but even if you consider being sustainable there, I think it is a good deed after all. What makes Aakar Designs different or exclusive than its competition? What makes you stand out?
one is I think we are trying to be very honest and original in our development of our language for a particular project, or call it the originality factor in a project. Number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is the sustainability factor. Like I said, all the projects we are doing today, whether it be a friend's house up in the hills, to group housing or anything, to a large campus projects, sustainability is at the heart and the key of our conceptual designs.
Wonderful. So when we speak of the Indian architecture and design space, how is it viewed globally? Where do we stand globally? And
Uh,
if you, since you know this industry so well at the back of your palm, I'd like to understand from you, what was it a few years ago and what is it today? Where do we stand?
I think the Indian industry has imbibed the best global practices today.
Okay.
There is no denying we are aware of all these best practices and we have imbibed them, and we are, I think, sharpening our focus on in this aspect. That is
Mhm.
one. Second is that we now need to educate the clients as well.
Mhm.
You know, like say for example, public sector and government is a big building aspect. So as architects, we need to educate the clients about their responsibility when it comes to sustainability and other social aspects related to architecture.
Okay.
I think that's a key factor where uh, India will, I think, score leaps and bounds over a country like emerging countries like China, etc., where you see architecture which is not rooted locally.
Right.
China, in fact, is a very good example of learning how not to make mistakes by rooting ourselves locally.
Okay. And so global practices, but I think also technology has played a huge part over the years, which we didn't have. Would you like to touch a little bit about that as
Yeah.
well?
Say, for example, now today, timber usage, glue lamp technology, These are all new things which are emerging, and I think India can leapfrog into that stage by using, though we may not have timber of our own, but we can import processed timber and do our projects in a more sustainable manner. Like say, timber is God's own building material, so why not use that?
Okay.
That's the key to the
And
whole thing.
for the benefit of our for our academic knowledge as well, so who better than you to tell us really about it? Which are some of the growing economies and countries that really matter to India when it comes to the these, like you mentioned, timber and wood? When it comes to the woodworking space, you're an architect. I'm sure you deal with people who are in the woodworking machinery and space. Which are like Sri Lanka, and from Vietnam, we know that a lot of all these sources are sourced, all these resources are sourced, I beg your pardon. So which are some of the countries, like you mentioned China is one of them? Would you like to talk about?
Now, when it comes to our partnership with the building materials, I think we need to deepen our relationship with countries like New Zealand,
Mm,
Australia,
mm,
which grow very responsible forestry,
mm,
where they grow timber to be harvested over a 6 or 8 year time period. Radiata pine being one of their prime products.
mm.
So is a lot of the European region,
Okay,
especially what was earlier the Eastern Bloc.
okay,
They have very dense forests which they can harvest in a responsible manner. So is Finland today
okay,
a good source of material because they have the technology, and they Scandinavian countries, in Scandinavian countries, Canada, Japan, you are not allowed to build a 7 story structure. You have to only build it in timber. It's only below ground structures that can be in concrete. So
okay,
this is their level of responsibility. I think we need to deepen our ties with such countries and learn
okay.
from their examples, because they've already been on this path for the last decade or so.
All right. Last few questions, sir. uh, what has being an architect taught you over the last few years of your career, and a life lesson, if I may say so, that you have learned of being an architect, and something that you'd like to share for future entrepreneurs, architects, designers who want to enter into this space? What would you like to tell them?
I think your question is in two
Two
parts.
parts,
Two
yes.
parts. One is
A
what I
life
have learned.
lesson, yes.
Well, I love the rigors of architecture.
Mhm.
There is no shortcut in architecture, but rigor, and after a while, you start enjoying the rigor.
Mm.
So that is one aspect, and there is no shortcut to anything.
Mm.
That's one. Your second part of your question, a message for the youngsters today. What I feel is that today's youngsters, they need to be wary of the slavery of the technology. They should uh, use technology as a tool
Right.
for their working, not become a slave to the technology.
Which
Like
we
say,
have become,
like say,
unfortunately.
computers.
Yes.
They use them for
For
presentations. They use
everything,
them, but
yes.
they don't use the computer as a thinking tool,
Hmm.
which is what my message to them is. See,
So,
today's kids are very bright, they're
yeah,
exposed, they have much better learning
right.
experiences than we had in our days.
Mm.
So I think they need to use technology to,
As a
they
thinking
should
tool,
harness technology as a creative tool
right.
and not become a slave to it. That's the key to the.
Right. So, you are aware of platforms such as IndiaWood and Index, a platform that we make sure and ensure where leaders like yourself, veterans and experts of this industry, of this sector, come together. Those from the woodworking, wood machinery industry, they all come together on one single platform, and exchange ideas and values. And I'd like to know from you, and I'd like to also hear from you, what do you think of such platforms? How important it is to have something like this in today's time, and how relevant it is for architects like you to be on board with us for shows and expos like this?
I think India Wood is a great platform. It's a great learning platform.
Mm.
In fact, it's a laboratory of sorts,
Mhm.
where professionals of all ages and timelines can come, and depending on their exposure, depending on their need, could imbibe and learn from these platforms like India Wood. In fact, in my own particular case, I remember going to India Wood the first time about 10,
Mm.
12 years back,
Mm.
where I had gone to the Canadian timber stall. And I mentioned to them, I said, well, what you're showcasing is only relevant in your context in Canada, but not in the Indian context.
Context.
Today, years later, I think we are doing a lot more than what they can offer us. in the Indian context. So
Yes.
this is how fast your learning and your imbibing of knowledge can be.
Mm.
So these platforms are, I think, doing a wonderful job. Like I said earlier in my
Yeah.
conversation, that wood is God's own building material.
Right.
So India Wood teaches you how to treat wood, how to handle wood, how to make the best of it, and it also gives you a lot of design inspirations and examples.
And my last question to you, sir, a dream project of yours that you've perhaps already worked on, or if you have another dream project or a person that you'd like to work with.
Well,
Very
we've been
keen.
very fortunate, like I said, in our journey. When
Yeah.
we started, we got exposure to the Russian projects and multiple competitions, one after another, which have, I think, dotted the landscape very beautifully, to the Bhutan project, to see
Right.
the Bhutan project, to believe
Hmm.
where we are. Right now, we are working on a project which is for the ISKCON temple in Vrindavan.
Oh,
Now, the
wow.
ISKCON project is that they are building what is known as the tallest uninhabited structure worldwide. It's about 221 meters tall.
Okay.
So we're doing this in diagrid,
Hmm.
which is a new method of doing tall structures and also being in zone 4 of the earthquake thing. So it's a very big challenge,
Mhm.
apart from putting together a temple, which is very special,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So we're working on it, enjoyable.
And it's a spiritual experience as well, I'm sure.
That's right, sure,
ISKCON
sure.
is, of course, something that the entire country knows about, and massive following, of course. So lovely to know that you're also working on one such project. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with, a message, a keynote that you'd like to leave us with as we end this podcast?
I think, like you rightly said, we all need to expose ourselves to all new technologies that are coming, learn from them, from these fairs, exhibitions, etc., that are dotting the landscape, and now they're going into tier 2, tier 3 cities. So that's one very big thing. That is the thing. Second thing that I would suggest to the youngsters is to, uh, you know, take the profession of architecture with a lot more rigor.
Mm.
There is definitely a lot of brightness and sunshine at the end of the journey.
All right, and with that very lovely sunshiny note, we'd like to conclude this conversation with Mr. Gurpreet Singh. So, thank you so
Thank you
much for
so
taking the
much.
time
Thanks
out
a lot.
and
Thank you.
enlightening us with not just what you have done, but also you've shed light on this industry and told us about things that we've learned along this conversation. So, I thank you for that. But stay tuned to the Nuremberg Messe podcast channel, where we bring you all the latest conversations and interviews with people that matter to these industries, several industries that we work with as well on the Nuremberg Messe podcast channel. And of course, we'll be bringing you all these podcasts from time to time to let you know that it's also important for you to learn from them, from these industries. Thanks for watching.